Good evening, Brian, and welcome along to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337, and our lockdown lecture series. Brian, this is meeting number 88, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you along here this evening. As ever, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines for our Zoom meetings? Please keep your video running, and should you have any bandwidth challenges, just please drop me a little message in the chat and switch your video off. And also, I ask you to have a recognisable name in the little box in front of you as well. That is very much appreciated. Well, Brian, as all of you are fully aware, we're in the height of Remembrance Tide, and this is what we would normally have if we had a regular meeting. We would have a small service of remembrance. I've also tried to ensure that this evening's subject is related to remembrance, and we very much look forward to Brother Grant Macleod regaling us with the stories of the development of military travelling lodges. However, before we do that, Brian, it's my intention to have a very short but hopefully poignant moment of remembrance. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. Thank you, Brian. Well, Brian, as I said, it's a great pleasure to have a previous lockdown speaker come back to join us for this remembrance lecture this evening. Our speaker needs no introduction to many of us here, and it gives me the greatest pleasure to hand over the virtual floor to Brother Grant Macleod.
Thank you, Gordon. Can you see the screen okay?
That's it, just coming up. Yeah, it's on your big screen. You need to go to screen share. That's it. Perfect.
Right. Okay. Good evening, brethren. And again, it's great to be on Hope of Karachi's Zoom series, which is actually quite amazing, particularly at this particular time of year, coming up to Remembrance. Brian, tonight, what I thought I would do is give a talk. Everybody's heard of the military lodges and so on, but really look at sort of three questions as to why things come into being. So it's focused mainly on the sort of 17th, 18th century. However, I have updated the last few slides, so we go right up to what's happening at the moment. However, just to begin then, let's go right back in time. In 1633, Sir Robert Moray joined the Garde Ecosse, a regiment which fought in the army of King Louis XIII. He was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and sent to join the Covenanters army in Edinburgh in 1638. Several Freemasons who were members of the Lodge of Edinburgh No. 1 initiated him there on the 20th of May 1641. Hence the reason we have Lodge Sir Robert Moray, also number 1641. It's amazing what strings Grand Lodge can pull to get numbers. Although he was initiated into a Scottish lodge, the event took place south of the border. This is the earliest extant record of a man being initiated into a lodge on English soil. Thereafter, he regularly used the five-pointed star as shown as his Masonic mark on all his correspondence. It is also a symbol of significance in many Masonic orders. This is of interest for two reasons. As a soldier, this meant that he was possibly the first known speculative Mason, and it's also the first record of a travelling charter or warrant allowing a lodge to meet where the regiment was posted. The story really begins with the Jacobite Uprising, although the full structure of the army is dated from 1660 and the restoration of Charles II. The first uprising in 1715, the Jacobite Uprising, was less of a threat than the recent riots in London at that time. It was possibly the reason for Grand Lodge forming in London. However, the second was much more serious, and the Catholic threat to the House of Hanover was only squashed after the Battle of Culloden, where Scots fought on both sides. This was more of a religious war to stop the Catholic King James from ruling his country, in very brief terms, that is. William Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland, as shown, the third son of George II, was deputised to make Scotland safe and empower people to form regiments. The Black Watch being a prime example, which was created to watch the Highlands. The Duke was reputed to have been initiated in Germany. This is actually a page from the Irish records. The first regimental lodge, quite appropriately, is that of the Royal Scots, the 1st Regiment of Foot in 1732, by the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which was then numbered 11. Why was it not chartered under the Grand Lodge of Scotland? Well, it would be another 4 years before the Grand Lodge of Scotland would be formed, and the Royal Scots were serving in Ireland at that time. An example is this particular lodge, 252, is shown in 1754. Here we have a Welsh regiment applying to an Irish Grand Lodge that was stationed in Paisley in Scotland. It was also common to have 3, 4, or even 5 lodges attached within one regiment, depending on the number of battalions within a regiment. In fact, the first military lodge under the Grand Lodge of Scotland was the 12th Regiment of Foot, East Suffolk, in 1747, at the recommendation of the Earl of Kilmarnock, who was Grand Master Mason at that time. This regiment eventually fought against them during the 45 Jacobite Uprising. Again, something that seems to be quite common these days, where the British Army may well train people, and years later they are then used against us. It was previously known as the Duke of Norfolk's regiment, and claims a Mason Lodge in this particular regiment in 1685. However, there's no actual proof of this. Fort William's an interesting place to start before we look at military lodges relating to Scotland in general. In 1746, the governor of the fort, Alexander Campbell, was under a threat from the Jacobites led by Lochiel of the Clan Cameron. Both were Freemasons. Lochiel was a member in Dunblane, while Campbell's lodge was unknown, but he was a frequent visitor to the lodge in Fort William. This lodge was frequented by many soldiers at that time. In 1744, a number of soldiers were initiated from the 46th Foot, the Duke of Cornwall's light infantry, who were under the command of John Young, who later became the first Deputy Grand Master of Scotland in 1762. Due to the large numbers of serving brethren, they applied and received a warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland, numbered 227. During the United States, the US War of Independence, this fell into the hands of the American Army, but it was later returned under a special command of George Washington, who at that time was Master of Lodge 22 in Alexandria. This lodge was then posted to Canada as a permanent garrison, and eventually became the Lodge of Antiquity number 1, as head of the lodges under the Grand Lodge of Quebec. A similar situation occurred in the 14th Regiment of Foot, West Yorks. When the regiment left the fort, they asked Lodge Fort William, or the lodge at Fort William, to grant them the power to continue as a lodge in the regiment, wherever they could be stationed. This was granted by the lodge, not by the Grand Lodge, by the lodge itself, and the 14th worked under this authority for another 10 years before applying for a formal charter while stationed in Florida. This particular image is the Highland Light Infantry in Buenos Aires, which was not one of the best conflicts that we served in. In 1806, the 71st, the Highland Light Infantry later, was sent to Argentina in order to claim some of the Spanish territory, which it did successfully initially. However, the Spanish returned with a larger force to reclaim this land, and the regiment, the whole regiment, was taken captive. The lodge attached to the 71st Lodge lost their original warrant and all their Masonic silver, regalia, documents as well. The original warrant, as far as I'm led to believe, is now in the Buenos Aires Museum. The charter for this particular lodge is shown On the 5th of May 1808, Lodge 895 of the 71st Regiment was issued with a duplicate warrant, and this stayed with the Lodge until handed back to the Grand Lodge of Ireland in 1835, at the insistence of their commanding officer, for reasons that will become apparent later. Unfortunately, the jewels were found, or fortunately at this point, but unfortunately later on, the jewels were found in a pawn shop in Buenos Aires, returned to the Lodge in 1875, only to be stolen from the officers' mess when the regiment was stationed in India. This is going to be the subject of a new talk. I've been working on this particular Lodge 895 in the 71st, and hopefully at some point next year I'll be able to talk about this particular regimental lodge on its own. In 1808, the 79th Cameron Highlanders received a warrant under the ancient Grand Lodge of England, then based at Wheelie Barracks in Colchester. 19 of the 25 founders were members from the 92nd Gordon Highlanders. It would appear that the 92nd were about to leave Colchester and wanted a lodge to remain. Hence the form of a lodge, with the next regular battalion stationed at the barracks. In the first year, 6 soldiers from the 79th were initiated, and the lodge continued to work until 1832, when it returned its charter. Now, there are 3 important questions that I want to just look at. It gives you a rough idea of why and where and whatnot regimental lodges, how successful they became. Now, I've tried to limit the talk to army regiments of foot, in other words, infantry, although there are numerous examples of lodges in Royal Artillery, engineers, various other corps, cavalry, militia. There are also examples of lodges on board naval vessels. I think there are actually 3. It's interesting to note that just over 91, I think, out of the 101 regiments of foot had actually lodges attached to them, and many had more than one because they had maybe 2 or 3 battalions. Scottish lodges applied for warrants from Ireland and from England, as well as Scotland, as did all regiments. There were 3 important questions to answer. The first of these is, why did military lodges come into existence? Secondly, what good did they do? And thirdly, why did they eventually decline into near extinction? Well, the first one, why did military lodges come into existence? The 18th century itself was an era of brutality, and the lot of the soldier was as low as it possibly could be. The notion of a regular standing army was new, and few people agreed with this, since they paid taxes to keep it. Local people feared and detested having a garrison in their town, much the same way that I suppose many people in Aldershot were always a wee bit wary when certain regiments come in. Prior to this, regiments were formed by landowners or gentry who paid for everything. Unlike today, when soldiers were paid directly, then the pay went to the commanding officer or quartermaster, who may or may not have handed on the correct amounts to the soldiers. Since commissions were bought before 1870, often money was retained by the commanding officer to buy a higher rank, since this would improve his pension when his commission was sold. Many soldiers were recruited from jails or press ganged into joining. Many Highlanders were forced to join to avoid their parents being thrown off the land. And with poor pay and conditions, the morality and the loyalty of the common soldier really had to be improved. Regiments did not have sergeants' messes or officers' messes at that time, and so the lodge suddenly provided a means to teach moral lessons and to be accepted by the local people where they were stationed, since most towns had, or many towns had, Masonic lodges. Our entered apprentice charge, which emphasises loyalty to the country and to lodges, soon taught loyalty to the regiment as well. This was particularly important after Culloden, when many Scots suffered at government hands. They also allowed soldiers to meet officers on the level, something they would rarely have encountered before, and certainly not in regimental circumstances. Brother Field Marshal Wolseley said an officer should make himself loved as well as respected, and the lodge provided the means to start this process. He talked about shared interests with the rank and file, which could be achieved more easily within the lodge. In some cases, this was even more amazing. In 1794, the Duke of Gordon raised the 92nd Gordon Highlanders and became their commanding officer. He was also the Grand Master Mason of Scotland, and both battalions had lodges attached to them. This was not unusual. The Marquess of Lothian, the 9th Earl of Moray, the 7th Duke of Macleod, the 9th Earl of Dalhousie, the Earl of Moira were all Grand Master Masons while commanding their regiments. In 1770, the Royal Scots Greys Lodge had to be reconstituted because they had lost their charter in previous wars. And again, this was quite a common occurrence. And this was done by none other than the Grand Master Mason, General Houghton, who commanded all the King's Army in Scotland, today probably known as a General Officer Commanding. Although an English Mason, he had affiliated to Canongate Co-winning No. 2 and was an honorary member of the Lodge of Edinburgh, No. 1. At the time of his death, he was Colonel of the 31st Regiment, later these Surreys, which held Lodge Fort George, No. 100 under the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and became extinct in 1852. In 1759, another Commander-in-Chief for Scotland, Lord Adam Gordon, served as Master of the Lodge of Aberdeen. In 1770, the Master of the Scots Greys Kilwinning Lodge was William Lord Napier, whose son would become Grand Master Mason in 1788. Freemasonry in the army was now well and truly linked, and the travelling warrant allowed lodges to meet anywhere the regiment was stationed. By 1813, before the Battle of Waterloo, 352 lodges had been warranted by the 3 Grand Lodges. This number does not include lodges permitted by local lodges to meet, as in the Fort William case. What good did lodges do? Well, lodges provided decent soldiers a place to meet like-minded men in peace and harmony, rank irrelevant. Something very difficult to find in those days. Since messes did not exist, pensions did not exist, national insurance didn't exist, the British Legion, regimental benevolent funds were yet to be formed, the Lodge was the only organisation that would look after the welfare of the men and their widows who received nothing from the government. The few records that do exist of military lodges show that they gave most of their benevolent funds to the widows or to assist the cost of a funeral. An indirect benefit, but vitally important, was one of the treatment of prisoners of war. Lodges not only provided a spirit of masonry in desperate situations, but actual assistance. British soldiers in France were able to receive food and clothing from their French brethren. Grand Lodges, the 3 British Grand Lodges, contacted the French Grand Lodge, who ensured this aid would get to the brethren and not be used for other purposes. Likewise, French prisoners of war over here received assistance from local lodges, which was a lifesaver. The French government refused to pay any money to look after any of their countrymen. Many French prisoners of war formed their own lodges in Britain and were often visited by local masons. One in Callendar even initiated local men. Many French officers, due to their aristocratic rank, were allowed the freedom of the town, although they had to be back by a certain time. Many of these officers visited local lodges and were very warmly welcomed into them. The countries were at war, but the craft bridged many of the divides. It has also been suggested that the French practices, which were very different from our own, led to some of the additional degrees, and one of the obvious ones is the Rose Croix. This particular photograph shows the furniture which was bought from prisoners of war by Sussex Lodge number 353 in England, and as far as I'm aware, the chair is still used today. The third question then, why did they eventually decline into near extinction? After the Battle of Waterloo, many regiments and battalions within regiments were disbanded and numbers reduced from about 250,000 to 100,000. As a result, many lodges returned their charters and soldiers went home, often joining their local lodge. The last chartered Scottish lodge ceased in 1860. Another reason was the commanding officer not permitting lodges to function. Unfortunately, too many cases of this was through mistaken identity with Ordnance lodges. In 1799, the Seditious Act forbade secret meetings. This was due to the fear of French spies with Napoleon. However, Masonic lodges, long recognised for their loyalty and charity, were exempt, and this worked well. During the 1820s and 30s, Ordnance lodges began to form in regiments, particularly when serving in Ireland. By 1835, there were actually 69 Ordnance lodges attached to regiments. The Commander-in-Chief of the Army felt that they were contrary to the rules of service and to the good order of military discipline. This seemed to be a fair judgment when it was discovered one of the aims of the Orange Order at that time was to place brother, the Duke of Cumberland, who was the Grand Master of the Orange and opposed to Catholic emancipation as a king, rather than Princess Victoria. This led to most commanding officers stating that all non-military meetings should be prohibited. Cumberland went on to become the Grand Master of Hanover and also the King of Hanover. Unfortunately, the oldest regiment, the Royal Scots, which had the oldest military lodge, returned its charter. The only lodges that missed the chop were those that seemed to be abroad. However, by this time, the military lodges, having served to create a British Empire in virtually every part of the globe, had spread the light of Freemasonry to other countries, with many forming stationary lodges when they left. I must point out another battalion formed a lodge within the Royal Scots called Unity, Peace and Concord, which is now number 316 under the United Grand Lodge of England today. One example is also the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots, Lodge number 74, serving in Albany in New York. They were posted home in 1757, but left their warrant since they had initiated so many American brethren. They continued to function under this warrant until 1765 before applying for its own. This lodge was described as consisting of officers and gentlemen, and when they left, they donated a large library of books, which is now in the proud possession of Albany Academy. Into the sort of more modern era, another reason for their extinction is the obvious one, the ultimate sacrifice. And two examples illustrate this. The 23rd Regiment of Foot, the one that was stationed in Paisley earlier on, now the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, took part in the disastrous Walkern expedition of 1809 and returned decimated. It took years for the lodge to return to full strength. The 26th, the 26th Regiment of Foot, the Cameronians, last lodge meeting was in 1914, and the warrant was returned shortly after. Due to the high number of casualties, the British had over 11,000 in 1915 at Neuve Chapelle. There were not enough members to open the lodge, with the regiment being nearly wiped out, and so they ceased to exist. Perhaps this is a most honourable end to a military lodge. The following slides are just a couple of examples to show the diverse nature of the craft and also the military. The Queen's Edinburgh Rifles, Royal Scots, in brackets, I think it's had a couple of name changes, number 1253. This is a memorial lodge that was founded to the memory of those of the 4th and 5th Battalions of the Royal Scots. These battalions were purely territorial in the First World War, but were posted and fought. They made the supreme sacrifice in the First World War, and it's now preserved as a tangible tribute to all the members of that regiment who have since made the supreme sacrifice. And the regiment was founded, the lodge was founded in 1921. And as far as I'm aware, this lodge continues to meet in Portobello. Lodge, the Highland Light Infantry, and then more recently it was added to the Highland Light Infantry Royal Highland Fusiliers, number 1459. This lodge was formed in the Sergeant's Mess in the depot in Maryhill Barracks, now gone, in Glasgow, in 1950. The name was altered to again attract the RHF, which was the HLI was a forerunner of the RHF, so it was to attract some of the soldiers who were leaving this, and it's always been known as the City of Glasgow Regiment. I think today there are very few who have any regimental association, but it would be nice to think that they could attract some of the RHF soldiers who do leave. Just to the right there is what's called the smoke seal. This was quite common in Ireland, where documents would be sealed by an actual smoke seal. Where they didn't have wax, it could be broken off. Smoke seals were used so that when returns were sent to particularly Dublin for the Grand Lodge of Ireland, they were guaranteed that if the smoke seal was undamaged, that the records would be correct. And the records that the Grand Lodge of Ireland have for a lot of the military lodges are fantastic. And if anybody is interested in doing some research, then it's certainly worth looking at a lodge that has an Irish history. And again, this is one of the things I want to extend. I want to look at the Highland Light Infantry in another talk. More recently, we have a lodge in Nebraska, Swisher Lodge, which served in Afghanistan working under dispensation, and Canada Lodge, which is the UD working under dispensation. All the brethren that were attached to this lodge or who joined the lodge were either civilians or military, and the lodge was stationed in Kabul. Swisher was named after one of the brethren that was killed in Iraq in 2003. Canada Lodge at the bottom, or to the brethren shown to the right, has now returned home and is now working in Canada. Over the years, we've had a number of lodges that have some kind of military attachment. And as you can see, we've got Navy Lodge, the Queen's Regiment, which is now the Prince of Wales's Royal Regiment, Pegasus Lodge, which encompasses not just the Parachute Regiment, but all the corps attached to the Airborne. We've got Rosemary Lodge, which is, or originally was, the Special Forces, and it was formed really through the 21st SAS, the Artist Rifles. RAF Lodge, obviously there's a huge number more, but for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's just the Navy and RAF, they ran out of ideas as to what they would call it, so they went for Navy and RAF Lodge, who knows. And then more recently we have our own Kajaki, which was formed through brother Mark Wright and his dad. 40 lodges in Britain can currently be regarded as having military connections. Approximately 30 of these are English. I think there's only 2 Irish now, and 8, 9, 10 possibly Scottish. Lodge 295 in the Irish Constitution, St Patrick's, is the last truly regimental lodge, and they're part of the Royal Dragoons, which were initially the 4th, 7th Dragoon Guards. One of their last operational tours in Iraq, they actually held 3 meetings in Basra. More recently, we have Bidand Lodge number 92, which was formed in 1996 in Belfast under the Grand Lodge of Ireland to commemorate the 92nd Gordon Highlanders. So again, it was really quite good to see that they were able to get the number 92. And under the Grand Lodge of Ireland, the numbers can be reused. So the number 92 didn't indicate a very old lodge. So brethren, that really concludes the talk. What I was just trying to emphasize was the connection that we have with the military side of things, the military lodges. I think Freemasonry and the military will be forever linked, which I think is an absolutely fantastic thing for not just us, but for soldiers. It certainly gives a lot of soldiers, a lot of servicemen, the camaraderie that they have within a regiment, within a corps, when they can come out. And, you know, it really, I think, I'm biased, but I think it's certainly something that we should be tapping into, just to let some of the guys who are come out see that there is something else, something that's very similar to some of the messes, and they can have a good time, which is what most soldiers really want to do anyway. So the military lodges, what have they done? You know, they spread Freemasonry. And I think without the military lodges, the travelling warrants, we wouldn't have Freemasonry across the world. Brethren, thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. If there's any difficult ones, I'll just pass them on to Gordon. And hopefully you've picked out something from that talk. Thank you, brethren.
Brother Grant Macleod, firstly, thank you for your service, and thank you for what you've done this evening, giving us a very enlightening presentation on the development of the military lodges that we've come to know and hear about over the years. I think it's no secret, Bern, that I'm quite passionate about the connections with the military and Freemasonry from the researches that I've done, but I love listening to others who've got that similar passion and can bring their own take on their researches to the fore. I will go to the questions in a minute, Bern, but I just want to read out a piece from the history of Lodge Hope of Karachi to round up Grant's talk, because the Lodge Hope of Karachi, we are descended also from a military travelling lodge, and arguably we can claim that, albeit there's a little bit of dubiety around a few years. But what it says in our history, brethren, is the lodge is descended from military and colonial origins. The first of the Masonic formation was the issue of a military charter issued in 1769 as a travelling lodge in the name of Maria, Colonel Wedderburn's lodge in the 22nd Regiment of Foot, the Cheshire Regiment. This was an English county regiment consisting of soldiers, mainly the fighting Irish, and officers, mostly Scots, producing an awesome combination in the many battles and wars which they were involved with, maintaining the empire. The regiment was originally issued a travelling warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland, but this got lost during their posting to the Mississippi about 1759. Till they received the military charter from Scotland, they probably met Irish fashion, informally to maintain the interests of the Bern, being 6,000 miles away and 3 months sailing time. They were able to bring them under control before they were posted to some other parts. With regards to numbers, the first one allocated to the regiment by the Grand Lodge of Scotland was 132, named Maria, issued in 1769, but it was cut off in 1809. However, on the 1st of November 1813, it would appear that the lodge was reponed and was renamed under a new number of 251 in the name of United Brothers, the Temple Mount Moriah, Port of Spain, Trinidad. This is a rather tenuous connection, but is sufficiently safe by its name and content to be very relevant. And then we went on, as you know, to become the first lodge, Scottish lodge in India, in around the late 1830s. So Grant, I think particularly for this lockdown lecture series, it's really nice that we can tie back to some of those names and places that you referred to. So we do have quite a few questions and comments for you. Let's see, good evening, all, good evening. No apologies, Aubrey. Aubrey, since your comment comes up, can I wish you a very happy 80th birthday for yesterday on behalf of everyone at the Lodge Hope of Karachi and our guests. You've
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Present, Aubrey, bringing us some sunshine from chilly, the other side of the world. So happy birthday to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. A question, Grant, while in battle, did the commanding officer get near the front? If so, wouldn't that put Grand Lodge in jeopardy?
Some did. Ones that were mentioned did not. Generally speaking, it would be bad practice for a commanding officer to be so far forward. The commanding officer, if he's doing his job properly, should really be coordinating everything, so he would be further back. So no. But there are incidents where commanding officers, lieutenant colonels, are killed in battle. But of the ones that were mentioned, no Grand Master Mason was that far forward.
And I think that there is the little dit from the 20th century, Bernard. What's the difference between the Army and the Royal Air Force? Well, the Army send the troops to the front line and the Royal Air Force send the officers to the front line. So there you go, Brian. Ian's internet is freezing and he'll catch up to this night. Steve Chalmers, during Napoleonic Wars, French prisoner of war had a lodge near Lanark called, I'll get this wrong, Amis dans Adversité, friends reunited in adversity. And another lodge in Melrose, whose local lodge complained to the Grand Lodge of Scotland that the French were stealing their candidates and visitors. Thank you, Steve. Charles Stewart, 1253, meet at Figget Street, Portobello, Lodge Portobello 226. Michael Hearn comments, Household Brigade Lodge number 2616. Land, Sea and Air Lodge number 1 of the Grand Lodge of New York meets on the occasional basis when reactivated. Slider, welcome back. Interesting talk. Danny Morrison, thank you, Brother Macleod. I do believe our first Right Worshipful Master at John O'Groat, 1333, Brother Dr. J.W. McGregor, was a medical officer who served at Flanders. Michael Hearn, there were 5 RN lodges on board Vanguard in 1760, now London Lodge 108, English Constitution, Prince Guadalupe in 1971, now Royal Somerset and Inverness Lodge number 4, English Constitution, Cancun in 1768, erased in 1792, and Bedford 1771, erased in 1790. And Brian, we have heard from Michael on some of the military lodges in the Navy, and that lecture is available on our YouTube channel. Well, I was expecting this one, Grant, coming in. We do have some of our Irish travelling brethren with us. So John Corley from St. Pat's, what have you got to say? Very interesting to hear why military lodges were closed down on 1835. My lodge, St. Patrick's Lodge, 295 Irish Constitution, was required to hand its warrant into Dublin in 1835. The warrant was reissued in 1878 when the regiment moved from Ireland to York. Do you know if there was some change to military rules that allowed the warrants to be reissued?
I think what it boiled down to was how understanding the commanding officer was. If the CO was in the craft, then these things could be taken, because at the end of the day, if the CO says, yes, okay, we're doing this, that's exactly what happens. The upper echelon at that point did not interfere. So basically the commanding officer, his word was gospel. So if the commanding officer was okay with it, then it happened. The army at that point, because there wasn't a threat from Napoleon and anything else, the army did not interfere with what lodges were doing or what regiments were doing. So no, there wasn't anything, there wasn't a directive from the MOD or anything like that, no.
Okay, thank you. Our immediate past and sometimes co-host of this lockdown lecture series states in 1989, Lodge St Margaret's Hope held a special meeting when seven serving sailors from HMS Liverpool worked a second degree on a serving sailor who was formerly a member of HMS Liverpool. The members of the degree team were from different lodges, 226, 75, 26, 26 again, 11, 1184, and all Master Masons who had never worked any degree before. And Michael comes back with a comment, sorry, Prince Guadalupe, in 1761. Stevie Chalmers, 4 years ago at a Trafalgar night, 6 brethren from the new aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth were present. And John, I was acting master when we had the 3 meetings in Iraq in 2005. And John, that must have been the conditions that you were out there in, that must have been an incredible experience. And if you want to unmute and share a couple of comments about that, John, please do.
Yeah, am I allowed to share my screen, Gordon?
Yes, yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, if I can just share my screen, brethren, you can actually see a picture, hopefully. This picture is of the installation meeting that we had in Shaiba Log Base in Iraq, just outside Basra in 2005. I'm the good-looking fellow on the right, but the master there actually, I believe, belongs to Kilwinning Lodge. He's certainly a Scottish Mason. He's currently in Oman teaching the Omani Armed Forces how to play the bagpipes. But he's so we got in there. We've got English Masons, Irish Masons. We've got a Australian policeman. We've got a German Mason there at the back as well. With Deacon's wands were made out of drain rods. As you can see, the brethren are wearing cook's aprons, with the exception of one brother who managed to bring his out. And the 3 lesser lights were the mounts for the 3 lesser lights were machined by that chap there in the Reamy Masher wagon during the day. That is the original warrant. And we had the warrant hand carried out on an RAF aeroplane by a non-Masonic warrant officer from the regiment who hand carried it out. That is the original warrant from 1758. We still meet using that warrant. If Brother Grant wants this picture, I'm quite happy to send you it.
Yes, please, John. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. If you can use it in your presentations, I don't mind at all.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So there's one other thing to mention, and that is that as you said, there's 2 travelling military lodges in the Irish Constitution at the moment. Let me just stop sharing that. Stop sharing. Okay, so there's 2 travelling military warrants in the Irish Constitution at the moment, and when the regiment moved from Catterick last year down to Warminster, I requested permission through the Grand Lodge of Ireland for us to relocate to a different area of England, and the answer from the Grand Lodge of England was, "You have a travelling warrant. We recognise that you have a right to meet wherever the regiment is. Just do what you want, but thanks for telling us."
Very nice.
Thanks very much for the moment, Gordon. Thank you.
No, John, thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for adding that to Grant's presentation. Yes, I agree with you. You're the intelligent and good-looking one because you were in Royal Air Force Blue in that photograph, you see. So, and Stevie Chalmers, I'm sure nobody was there as he usually is. Yeah, he was, I think, at that meeting at Trafalgar. So, Brendan, there doesn't seem to be any other questions in the chat. Once again, Brother Grant Macleod, on behalf of everyone here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi, can I thank you, sir, for your researches, for your endeavours producing your magazine that we regularly share on these pages as well, because that's another way of ensuring that we all get our daily advancement, and that is very much appreciated. Oh, John's just coming in with another comment. Lodge 19 Irish Constitution Connaught Rangers meets in Dublin. Were originally a travelling military lodge, now meet in Dublin. They have a toast at their meeting next year to Karachi. Well done, Grant, and very interesting. So on that, Grant, thank you so much once again, sir.
Thank you, Gordon.
Bren, I've still to finalise next week's speaker. I've been a wee bit busy travelling around. Those of you who are on my Facebook pages, you'll have seen that. But I will hopefully get it announced by Sunday and the notification up on our Facebook pages. And we're getting through the meetings slowly and surely, Bren, towards our cut-off on the 28th of December. So, Bren, for all of those that choose to go out and remember this week, I thank you. I hope that wherever and whatever service you go to, the weather is fair. And thank you all for being here this evening. Please feel free to unmute and give your personal congratulations to Brother Grant Macleod.
Brother Grant, thank you very much for a most interesting lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you,
done, Grant.
Good answers.
Well done.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. That was very interesting.
Many thanks, Grant. Many thanks. Excellent.
Very interesting talk.
Well done, Grant. Well done. Hello, Mr. Bingham.
Alistair Slider, how you doing?
Excellent, Grant. Well done.
Thank you.
Good. Oh,
Thank you, Grant. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Brother
thank you,
Grant,
Brother
thank
Grant.
you very much
Thank
indeed.
you, Gordon, for allowing us to take part again. And to all the brethren, stay healthy, stay safe. Good night, all.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you very much, Grant. Excellent, really interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Very good.
And I'll give you 5, Bren.
Hey, brethren.
No,
Good night,
before,
Yes.
I was a very young right whistle master at that Liverpool degree.
Aye, I was a very young whipping master doing the degree. And I wasn't even,
It was a very warm night, Nobby.
yeah, there's a lot of people there. That was 32 years ago. It seems like yesterday.
I've still got the jewel somewhere.
I've still got the jewel as well.
Might possibly been there myself.
And 4, Bren.
Going down on Friday night?
I think there must have been in excess of 300 and odd people in St Margaret's Hope that evening.
Aye, but that anyway.
And the carpet was about 4 squares wide.
It was a cracking night.
Good day. Had my own.
Good
Dick
night, all.
Beveridge was there, wasn't he?
Dick Beveridge was there, and we asked Dick to take part as well because we needed somebody else to do another bit. I think he did chaplain for us.
I can't remember. I remember him being there.
Aye.
And 3, Brian.
Now the slider's finished. Well done, Grant. Congratulations. A wonderful talk. Very poignant for this time of the year. Thank you very much.
And 2, Brian.
Always a pleasure to hear from you.
And 1, Brian. And once again, Brother Grant Macleod, thank you so much, sir, for your efforts. I think you've actually left us. I can't see on the screen now, but for the YouTube, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's gone
And
good.